Welcome to Asset Properties and Classification, presented by AssetWise Avara Performance Management. By the end of this unit, you will understand the properties of APM assets, know the options that are available for assets and how they are used, and know the different types of asset classifications in APM and how they are used. Assets are physical pieces of equipment that an organization needs to operate and maintain in order to meet its operations effectiveness goals. This supports the strategy development portion of the APM process, where assets that are causing the most organizational concern are selected for identifying risk and performance targets. Assets are something that you need to maintain. For assets, you can collect health and condition indicators, collect work history, and track reliability data. An asset can be equipment such as pumps, motors, fans, or heaters, collections of equipment such as systems and subsystems. They can be organizational, a department, an area, a cost center, or plant. Assets can be physical locations such as pumping location or a generator location. And assets may include assemblies and components, buildings, grounds, etc. Assets have properties, functionality, and characteristics that need to be set up and tracked. The asset properties include the asset type and classification, the asset priority, the asset function, and failure statistics. The properties often determine what you can and cannot do with the asset in the APM software. By using asset properties, you can categorize and filter certain data on an asset. This allows you to use the data in APM to satisfy your business requirements in your asset reliability program. Let's take a look at some of the asset properties. Asset classification is a way to group assets in order to control what you want to do with the asset. The classification affects how APM treats the asset. The classification is associated to a specific asset type. There are a number of system-defined classifications. They are organization, maintainable, component, component location, asset group, system, and subsystem. In an earlier topic, we looked at asset classification in some detail. Using a garage, car, and car systems as examples, we learned how assets can be of an organization type. This is represented by the garage. We also learned that equipment on which maintenance will be performed are maintainable assets. The car is an example of this. We saw that the car systems can also be maintainable assets. In this example, the systems are child assets of the car. Finally, we learned that assets that can be maintained but also moved from one location to another are called components. Components are installed into component locations. When you consider the garage, the car, and the car systems, the hierarchy may look like this. Other classifications are asset groups, systems, and subsystems. Asset groups are used to collect and organize groups of similar assets. For example, an asset group classification may be used to group all motors of a similar horsepower together. It is important to note that an asset group is not a physical piece of equipment. It simply groups other types of assets in the hierarchy. Assets that are classified as systems have the same behavior as maintainable assets. The system classification allows for a logical structure to be created. Grouping assets into a system makes it easier to search for the system and to compare data on similar assets. A system information view is included on system assets. This view allows users to see the properties of the system and its children. The system information is limited to 5 levels in the hierarchy. In the example shown here, we are able to view properties of the child asset, the burner, while the system asset is open. Each asset has a unique asset object. Each new asset must have an asset number and an asset type. The asset object enables you to keep track of all the information about the asset, collect indicator readings for the asset, create a maintenance program for the asset, write work requests or work orders for the asset, track downtime and failures, and organize assets into hierarchies. The asset type allows you to group assets with similar characteristics, such as pumps or motors. This grouping is useful when sorting, filtering, or searching for records such as assets, standard task templates, and strategy development templates. The APM install database is pre-populated with asset types. Additional asset types are set up from the site's administration menu. Open the menu and select Maintenance Settings, Asset Management, and then the Asset Types tab. Asset types can also be set up from the site's Asset View Settings tab. For each asset type, set the policies that will apply. These policies determine the behavior of the asset and how the asset with the particular asset type can be used. Various policies can be set for each asset type. They include whether or not downtime cost rules or incidents can be defined, whether work requests, work order tasks, and standard tasks can be created, whether standard jobs can be created, whether barriers can be defined for assets of this type, whether or not only components of the same asset type can be installed to locations of this type, and finally, whether or not assets of this type typically exist in a CMMS system outside of APM. If your organization uses the Enterprise Management or EAM features, you may also be able to determine whether costs can be charged directly to assets of this type. The effects of degradation on infrastructure such as buildings, highways, bridges, oil, gas, or chemical processes, water and wastewater systems is significant, both in economic and in environmental terms. The degradation of equipment and assets occurs over a period of time and may be caused by abrasion, corrosion, or erosion. Degradation tracking can be set for assets based on the asset type. This option is activated from the Asset Types Policies tab. Assets that are available for degradation tracking can be included on risk-based inspection analyses, also known as RBI analyses. Asset statuses. An asset's status is based on the operational status of the asset. Unique statuses can be defined for each asset type. You can use asset status codes to set the status that the asset must be in when a standard task is triggered. For example, you might create a standard task that is only triggered when an asset is removed for repair. Changing the asset status could affect triggers for existing standard jobs. You can also use status codes to sort assets in a list. A parent asset's status is shared by child assets. Component locations share the status of the parent. An installed component gets its status from the location. Changing the status on the parent changes it for all children. When you change the status of an asset, you can provide a reason for the change. A history of status changes is retained in APM. The history includes the name of the person making the change, the date it was done, and the reason. Now we will look at additional asset information. You can assign a barcode and an area to an asset. The barcode that is entered on the asset object is converted to a valid barcode symbol when it is scanned for use when collecting indicator readings for the asset. Areas are defined for the site and are used to identify the physical location of the asset. Typical use is to identify a section of a plant, a specific level, etc. You may want to record additional information about a specific asset. You can add several descriptions. You can add a description of how the asset operates, a description of its processes. This is useful when determining the appropriate reliability approach to use. And you can provide a description of degradation mechanisms or failure modes of the asset. This is available when degradation tracking is turned on for the asset type. You can record information about an asset's operating window. This is numerical information about the asset's designed, actual, and integrity operating variables, often including minimum and maximum measurements and measurement frequency. Operation outside of these limits can result in accelerated damage to equipment. Operation within the defined limits should result in predictable and/or reasonably low rates of equipment degradation. Operating parameters are available in strategy development analyses such as MTA2 or RCM2 for reference purposes. However, not all assets require that operating parameters be defined. If the asset type is set to allow operating parameters to be defined for the asset, an operating window tab is included on the asset object. The age of the asset can be recorded. The current age, expected remaining life in years, and the expected replacement date can be included. This information is useful when analyzing asset health and maintenance strategies. To an asset object, you can attach procedural documents that provide the information required when inspecting or maintaining the asset. Examples are lockout and tagout procedures, safety documents, material safety data sheets, and corporate procedures. The standard documents and procedures mentioned are included in the Reliability Program view. For each asset, you can select the default settings that apply for work documents, such as work requests or work orders. When work documents are generated for the asset, these predefined settings are included. If assets are to be transferred from one site to another, you can require that approval be given before the transfer can take place. Assets and CMMS integration. Some organizations maintain asset records in a CMMS system apart from APM. This allows them to do planning and scheduling of work and to capture the associated cost details. CMMS systems apart from APM do not proactively address an asset's reliability program. For this reason, the CMMS is the master system for asset information, whereas the asset's reliability program is managed in APM. Using the CMMS integration functionality in APM, you can exchange information about assets, work orders, standard tasks, and jobs with the CMMS. Because asset information is synchronized between the two systems, rules are set up for the asset hierarchy behavior. These rules are mapped at the enterprise level. Here is an example. The integration settings and the asset type must be set to allow CMMS integration. To summarize, we have looked at the various properties of APM assets. We have looked at asset types and how they are used. We've looked at asset classification. You have learned about asset statuses and how they are used. You have learned about asset descriptions, operating parameters, and asset age. You have seen that asset options can determine the work documents that are created. And you have learned that assets in APM can be integrated with those of a CMMS system apart from APM. This concludes the Asset Properties and Classification module.